Good morning, YouTube. It's CM Maritime History here, back again with another video after a little bit of a break here. So, this morning, or should I say afternoon now, I just looked at my clock here. We're going to talk about the SS Eastland. I've planned this video for about 3 weeks now. This is just when I started to actually film it. For some background information, the SS Eastland was a tour boat that companies in Chicago or just regular people in Chicago could board, or in case companies they could rent out the boat and use it for a like transportation to company picnic or something, which is in the case of the Eastland. Okay, construction. The Eastland was commissioned during 1902 by the Michigan Steamship Company and built by the Jenks Shipbuilding Company of Port Huron, Michigan. The ship was named in May of 1903, immediately before her inaugural voyage. However, there were some early problems. On July 27th of her 1903 inaugural season, the ship struck the laid-up tugboat George W. Gardner and sank the tugboat at her dock at the Lake Street Bridge, Chicago, Illinois, but received only minor damage to the Eastland herself. Another problem. On August 14th, 1903, while on a cruise from Chicago to South Haven, Michigan, 6 of the ship's firemen refused to stoke the fire for the ship's boiler. They claimed that they had not received their potatoes for a meal. So these guys mutinied because they didn't get the potatoes. Sounds kind of silly, but let's keep going. When they refused to return to the fire hole, Captain John, I hope I get this right, Perue, okay, arrested the 6 men at gunpoint. Firemen George Lippin and Benjamin Myers, who were not part of the group of 6, stoked the fires until the ship reached harbor. Upon the ship's arrival in South Haven, the 6 men, Glenn Watson, Mike Davern, Frank LaPlarte, Edward Fleming, Mike Smith, and William Madden, were taken in the town jail and charged with mutiny. Shortly thereafter, Captain Perue was replaced. And because the ship did not meet a targeted speed of 22 miles per hour or 33 kilometers per hour during her inaugural season, and had a draft too deep for the Black River in South Haven, Michigan, where she was actually being loaded for cargo, the ship returned in September of 1903 to Port Huron for modifications, including the addition of an air conditioning system and machinery adjustments to reduce draft. Even though the modifications increased the ship's speed, they added additional weight and reduced her draft, thereby reducing the metacentric height and inherent stability as originally designed. Now, the metacentric height of a ship is a measurement of the initial static stability of a floating body. It is calculated as the distance between the center of gravity of a ship and its actual metacenter itself. It's basically a measurement for buoyancy. Now, before the Eastland's actual sinking caused by listing, she did have several other listing incidents, not as bad as the one we'll get to in a few minutes or so here, but let's hear about this anyway. Upon her return to South Haven in May of 1904, the ship handily won a race against the city of South Haven, Chicago. In the meantime, the Eastland was experiencing periodic problems of her stability while loading and unloading cargo and passengers, and nearly capsized on July 17th, 1904, after leaving South Haven for about 3,000 passengers. Subsequently, her capacity was lowered to 2,800 passengers, cabins were removed, lifeboats were added, and the hull was repaired. Then, on August 5th, 1906, another incident of listing occurred, which resulted in the filing of complaints against the Chicago-South Haven line that had purchased the ship earlier that year. Before the 1907 season, the ship was sold to the Lakeshore Navigation Company, and then was moved to Lake Erie. In 1909, the ship was sold again to the Eastland Navigation Company and continued running excursions between Cleveland and Cedar Point. Cedar Point is a 364, well, nowadays, it wasn't really then. Now if you look up Cedar Point, it's a amusement park. It was not, well, it was actually an amusement park then, but not as famous as it is now. It's a 364-acre amusement park located on a Lake Erie Peninsula in Sandusky, Ohio, opened in 1870. So it's considered the second oldest operating amusement park in the United States. So it ran excursions between the theme park and Cleveland. No, I reversed that. Between Cleveland and Cedar Point Theme Park. After the 1909 season, the remaining 39 cabins were removed, and prior to the 1912 season, the top smokestack sections were removed to shorten their stack height. On July 1st, 1912, another incident occurred when the Eastland had a severe listing of around 25 degrees while loading passengers in Cleveland. 25 degrees is a very large list. It's very noticeable and hard to walk on. In June of 1914, the Eastland was sold to the St. Joseph Chicago Steamship Company and returned to Lake Michigan for St. Joseph, Michigan to Chicago, Illinois service. Now we get to the sinking. This is a very grainy, old photograph of the Eastland's hull after she had rolled over. Let's talk about the disaster. On July 24th of 1915, Eastland and 4 other Great Lakes passenger steamers, the Theodore Roosevelt, the Petoskey, the Racine, and the Rochester, were chartered to take employees from Western Electric Company's Hawthorne Works in Cicero, Illinois, to a picnic in Michigan City, Indiana. This was a major event in the lives of the workers, many of whom could not actually take holidays. During 1915, the new Federal Seamen's Act had been passed because of the Titanic disaster 3 years prior. The law required retrofitting of a complete set of lifeboats on Eastland. Now, this act, same thing occurred in Britain, I do believe under a different name, but still. Because the Olympic began additional lifeboats, almost all ships, actually no, I believe every single ship built prior to 1912, and then the new ships that were built afterwards, were fitted with enough lifeboats to fit their entire capacity on board at one time. This is just the, yes, this is the United States Act. Yes, I believe it was known as the, well, it's known as the Seamen's Act, but it's formally known as the Act to Promote the Welfare of American Seamen in the Merchant Marine of the United States, or the Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act. And its nickname is the Magna Carta of American Sailors' Rights. So, after this, the additional weight of the new lifeboats may have made Eastland more dangerous by making her even more top-heavy than she already was. Some argue that other Great Lakes ships would suffer from the same problem. Nonetheless, it was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson himself. Eastland had the option of maintaining a reduced capacity or adding lifeboats to increase capacity. Its leadership elected to add lifeboats to qualify for a license to increase its capacity to 2,570 passengers, which is probably not a good idea in retrospect considering the ship was already off balance. Eastland was already so top-heavy that she had special restrictions concerning the number of passengers that could be carried. Prior to that, during June 1914, Eastland had again changed ownership, this time bought by the St. Joseph and Chicago Steamship Company, with Captain Henry Peterson appointed the ship's master. In 1914, the St. Joseph and Chicago Steamship Company removed the old hardwood flooring of the forward dining room on the cabin level and replaced it with 2 inches of concrete. They also added a layer of concrete near the aft gangway. Together, this added about 15 to 20 tons of weight. On the morning of July 24th, passengers began boarding Eastland on the south bank of the Chicago River between Clark and LaSalle Streets about 6:30 a.m., and by 7:10 a.m. the ship had reached a capacity of 2,572 passengers. The ship was packed, with many passengers standing on the open upper decks, and beginning to lift slightly to the port side, away from the wharf. The crew attempted to stabilize the ship by emitting water into her ballast tanks, with little avail. At 7:28 a.m., 18 minutes after she reached her capacity, Eastland lurched sharply to port, and then rolled completely under her port side, coming to rest on the river bottom, showing here, which was only 20 feet below the surface, and barely half the vessel was submerged. Many other passengers had already moved below decks on this relatively cool and damp morning to warm themselves before their departure. Consequently, hundreds of people were trapped inside by the water and the sudden rollover. Some were crushed by heavy furniture, including pianos, bookcases, and tables. Although the ship was only 20 feet from the wharf, and in spite of the quick response by the crew of a nearby vessel, the Kenosha, which came alongside the hull to allow those stranded on the capsized vessel to leap to safety, as you can see here, the rescue is taking place, 844 passengers out of the 2,572, and 4 crew members died in the disaster. Many of the passengers on Eastland were immigrants, with large numbers from present-day Czech Republic, Poland, Norway, Germany, Ireland, Sweden, Denmark, Italy, Hungary, and Austria. Many of the Czech immigrants had settled in Cicero. Of the Czech passengers aboard, 220 perished in the disaster. The bodies of the victims were taken to various temporary morgues established in the area for identification. By afternoon, the remaining unidentified bodies were consolidated in the armory of the 2nd Regiment. In the aftermath, the Western Electric Company provided $100,000 to relief and recovery efforts of family members of the victims of the disaster. One of the people who was scheduled to be on Eastland was 20-year-old George Hollis, an American football player who was delayed leaving for the dock and arrived after the ship had overturned. His name was listed on the list of deceased in newspapers. When fraternity brothers visited his home to send their condolences, he was revealed to be unharmed. Hollis went on to become coach and owner of the Chicago Bears and a founding member of the NFL. His friend and future Bears executive Ralph Brizzolara and his brother were on the Eastland when she capsized, narrowly escaped through the portholes. Despite stories to the contrary, no reliable evidence indicates Jack Benny, the famous actor, was aboard the Eastland or scheduled to be on the excursion. Possibly the basis for this report was that Eastland was a training vessel during World War I, and Benny received his training in the Great Lakes Naval Base where Eastland was stationed. The first known film footage taken of the recovery efforts was discovered and then released during early 2015 by a graduate student at the University of Illinois at Chicago. This is actually part of the film, I do believe. Marion Eichholz, the last known survivor of the capsizing, died on November 24th, 2014 at the age of 102. Now we're going to talk about the actual disaster in the media. Writer Jack Woodford witnessed the disaster and gave a first-hand account to the Herald and Examiner, a Chicago newspaper. In his autobiography, Woodford writes, "And then movement caught my eye. I looked across the river. As I watched in disoriented stupefaction, a steamer large as an ocean liner slowly turned over on its side, as though it were a whale going to take a nap. I didn't believe a huge steamer had done this before my eyes, lashed to a dock, in perfectly calm water, in excellent weather, with no explosion, no fire, nothing. I thought I had gone crazy." Carl Sandburg, then known better as a journalist than a poet, wrote an angry account accusing regulators of ignoring safety issues and claimed that many of the workers were there on company orders for a stage picnic. Sandburg also wrote a poem, The Eastland, that contrasted the disaster with the mistreatment and poor health of the lower classes at the time. The Eastland disaster was actually incorporated into the 1993 series premiere of the Disney Channel original series, So Weird. In the episode, teenage paranormal enthusiast Fiona Phillips encounters the ghost of a young boy who drowned during the capsizing while exploring a nightclub in the Chicago River and attempts to know why he has contacted her. In 2012, Chicago's Looking Glass Theater produced an original musical about the disaster entitled Eastland, a New Musical. And the Eastland disaster is also pivotal to the story of one family told in the play/musical Failure, a Love Story, which premiered in Chicago also in 2012 at the Victory Gardens Theater. Now, for the inquiry. A grand jury indicted the president and 3 other officers of the steamship company for manslaughter and the ship's captain and engineer for criminal carelessness, and found that the disaster was caused by conditions of instability caused by any or all of overloading of passengers, mishandling of water ballast, or the construction of the ship. The court refused extradition, holding the evidence to support this was too weak, barely a scintilla of proof to establish probable cause to find the 6 guilty. The court reasoned that the 4 company officers were not aboard the ship and that every act charged against captain and engineer was done in the ordinary course of business, more consistent with innocence than with guilt. The court also reasoned that Eastland was operated for years and carried thousands safely, and that for this reason no one could say that the accused parties were justified in believing the ship seaworthy. So, this picture is actually a close-up picture of another famous picture of the Eastland. If you ever get to see it, there's a picture of the passengers on the hull, with this tugboat here alongside and another tugboat down here. That's actually the Kenosha is down over here. And then, looking at the picture right now, I have it pulled up on my my phone here as I'm recording the video. The other tugboat that is actually over here is actually illegible, so I cannot read that. But this is the almost full story of the Eastland. Now, afterwards, this is what's known as the second life. After Eastland was raised on August 14, 1915, she was sold to the Illinois Naval Reserve and recommissioned as USS Wilmette, stationed at the Great Lakes Naval Base. So that's why, if you didn't understand earlier when I said that Eastland was stationed at the naval base years after she sank, that is why. Her hulk was raised up from the river. She was converted to a gunboat, renamed the Wilmette on February 20th, 1918, and commissioned on September 20th, 1918, with Captain William B. Wells in command. Commissioned late in World War I, Wilmette did not have any combat service. It trained sailors and experienced noble upkeep and repairs until placed in ordinary at Chicago on July 9th of 1919, retaining a 10-man caretaker crew aboard. On June 29th, 1920, the gunboat was returned to full commission. On June 7, 1921, Wilmette was given the task of sinking UC-97, a German U-boat surrendered to the United States after World War I. The guns of Wilmette were manned by gunner's mate J.O. Sabin, who had fired the first American cannon of World War I, and gunner's mate A.F. Anderson, the man who fired the first American torpedo in the conflict. For the remainder of her 25-year career, the gunboat served as a training ship for naval reservists of the 9th, 10th, and 11th Naval Districts. It made voyages along the shores of the Great Lakes, carrying trainees assigned to her from the Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois. Ernie Pyle, the famed World War II correspondent, was one of those trainees where he spent 3 weeks on the ship during late summer 1921. Wilmette remained in commission, performing a reserve training mission until she was placed out of commission and service on 15th of February 1940. During August of 1943, Wilmette was given the honor of transporting President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Admiral William D. Leahy, James F. Burns, and Harry Hopkins on a 10-day cruise to McGregor and Whitefish Bay to crown war strategies. On April 9, 1945, she was returned to full commission for a brief interval. Wilmette was decommissioned on November 28, 1945, and her name was deleted from the Navy list on December 19, 1945. During 1946, Wilmette was offered for sale. Finding no takers on October 31, 1946, she was sold to the Hyman Michaels Company for scrapping, which was completed in 1947. So, that's the full story of the SS Eastland, or the USS Wilmette. I hope you all have enjoyed this video, and a new video will be out hopefully sooner than the last one. There won't be like a week and a half delay. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and have a good one.